I am delighted to welcome us all, those of us here in the room at Hinsley Hall. And it's a gorgeous day out here in sunny Leeds. We're thinking of all of you whose day is drawing to a close on the far side of the world. We're thinking all of you who've stayed up till midnight or even beyond to be with us. We so appreciate it. Last night, we had two of the most powerful women in the English-speaking Catholic sphere. I don't think many of us are going to forget it in a hurry. Today may be a slightly different note. It will be my absolute pleasure first to welcome Tony Flannery, Redemptorist, who had one of the stressful journeys of the world yesterday, getting from Limerick to Dublin Airport, and who has lived to tell the tale. And we are so grateful to him for giving us his whole weekend to be amongst us. Born in Ireland at a time when just about the only route to education was through junior seminary and ordination, Tony became one of the most popular priests on the retreat circuit. And he saw firsthand the pressures that the Church's teachings put people under, the conflicting demands on their faith as against life in the real world. He began writing about it. And he was one of the three founders of the ACP, the Association of Catholic Priests in Ireland. This courageous group was the only priestly association in Ireland without a bishop to head it up, in other words, to keep it in line. And so, of course, the reaction from the Vatican was to shoot the messenger. I asked Tony last night whether there would be any Catholic parishioner in Ireland who didn't know who he was, and therefore who didn't know his story. And he thought for a moment. "I'd say not," he replied. Now, by contrast, over here in England and Wales, I've been asking friends for the better part of the past year. And this is educated Catholics, people who take the faith seriously, whether they had heard of Tony Flannery. Almost without exception, I get a frown. No, who is he? So, may I please express, with our warmest thanks, our joy at having Tony here live amongst us. Tony, would you like to wander up from your place of hiding over there? Before you begin, Tony, I don't want to cause a stampede, but I must hold up your book, which I hope everyone online is seeing. There are 30 copies in the bookshop over there. And Catherine has kindly given up her Saturday to be here with us to let us have for yourselves From the Outside by Tony Flannery. And may I suggest that you will not want to leave Hinsley Hall without your personally signed copy from this happy day. Tony, over to you.
Thank you very much. For introductions, it wasn't the greatest telling me that nobody knew who I was. Thank you very much.
We can't account for our ignorance.
Well, maybe they're better off. Anyway, it's good to be here. The reason, one of the first books I wrote, which is about 30 years ago, was called From the Inside, a priest's view of the Catholic Church. That was when I was still in ministry. It was back in the 1990s. So that's why that ended up with that title, From the Outside, which is where I am now. And anyway, look, Mary has told you enough about me. 12 years out of ministry, forbidden to minister publicly in Catholic property. I'm actually on Catholic property now. It's only the second time in 12 years that I've been allowed into the hallowed ground to speak. I mean, I can go to Mass and stuff like that. Anyway, it's been an interesting 12 years. I was very involved, as Mary said, in the Association of Catholic Priests, and out of that I got involved in the international church reform movement. And I've been around the world at meetings and conferences and speaking, and that's been fascinating. The other thing I discovered, which was very interesting, when I got over the old trauma of, say, the first year or so, I found that as a priest, and particularly as a preacher, I was more restricted both in my thinking and in my writing, reading and study than I was aware of. And suddenly that I was out of that, I felt free in a way I hadn't felt before. So in the last 12 years, my views have changed fairly dramatically on a lot of areas. And I suppose that book is part of the fruit of that. So I just want to touch on a couple of them this morning, because again, Mary has laid down the law very strictly as to how long we speak and when we have to shut up. And I mightn't obey the Vatican, I can tell you. I've come to know a bit, I'm not an expert by any means, but I've come to know a bit on Théa de Chardin, very interesting character. And an American television station recently did a documentary on him, which was very, very good. I have a quote in the book that I'll begin with. Now, he said this back in the 1920s. He was a young man. His big speciality was he was an expert on the whole evolutionary process, and he was a paleontologist, you know, the ones that go digging up old artifacts and studying the origins of creation and all that sort of thing. And he said, there are 3 weak stones in the foundations of Christianity. And particularly, he was referring to the Catholic Church. 3 weak stones. They're fascinating. The first one, a government that excludes democracy. Now, poor old Francis is having a go at trying to change that. Or is he? Remains to be seen. That's the first one. The second one, a priesthood that minimizes women. Still the same despite all our battles. And the last one, a revelation that excludes future prophecy. Now, that's the one in particular I want to focus on a bit this morning. So I won't really talk about the women's issue. It was one of the issues that I was silenced about. And like I've said, so many of you anyway know a lot more about it than me at this stage. Another one of the things that they got me on was the origins of priesthood. Because in my writing I had suggested that Jesus did not found a priesthood. And now I think increasingly I notice more and more scholars are saying the same thing. That's actually enormously important, because if it became accepted in Catholic theology that Jesus didn't found the priesthood, then most of the arguments, if not all of them, against ordaining women would be gone. So that's an interesting one. Okay. All learning is time-bound. Think about that for a moment now. All learning is time-bound. In other words, whatever we learn and whatever we understand and whatever we know and say now is a reflection of the time we live in, with the knowledge and the understanding that we have at this time, which is inevitably that's the case. But when a particular generation decides that their knowledge and their understanding is the whole truth and has to be accepted for all time, we have a difficulty. And that has happened so much in the Catholic Church. A lot of church doctrine has its origins in the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. Now, one of the things that they believed at that stage was that the Bible was historically accurate. In other words, and I'll just take this as an example, the story of creation. That the story of creation in Genesis is exactly how it happened. And now we know, of course, that the story of the story of creation in Genesis is mythology. It's a beautiful mythological story, but it is mythology. And rigid doctrines for all time should not ever be based on a mythological story. Mythological stories are not meant to do things like that. Poor old Chardin, at a very young age, I think it was in 1925, so he was in his late 20s, early 30s. He wrote, excuse me, he wrote an article. I think it was one of the first experiments at publicly writing, suggesting that maybe the doctrine of original sin also had a weak foundation because of what it was based on. Boy, did they come after him. And you know what they had demanded that he do? They demanded that he make a public statement accepting that the story of Genesis was exactly how the world was created. Now, at that stage, I don't know exactly what knowledge he had, but like as we know now, creation is 14 billion years or some enormous time like that. Humanity has been on this earth for at least 150,000 years. And they expected and demanded that poor old Chardin would say, I believe and I accept that the creation of the world is exactly as it is recounted in Genesis. I mean, what were they thinking of? And that was 100 years ago. And have we actually advanced very much in the church since then? No. Talk about slow to change. He didn't do it, of course. And effectively, from there on, Chardin was out. He wrote a number of books, as we know, but none of them were ever published. Now, he was intelligent enough to leave all his writings to a woman friend of his, and he wasn't long in the grave till she began to churn them out. And even Pope Francis is quoting him nowadays. So there you go. It took Galileo about 500 years to be released. Some people tell me it'll take me about the same length. Not that I'm in the class of those people. And the other thing I found fascinating in the documentary about the Chardin, he died in New York. There were 10 people at his funeral. An extraordinary thing. Yeah, anyway. Okay, what's the doctrine of original sin? There are some people online watching this who are saying, yeah, that's de fide. We have to accept that. The doctrine of original sin is touching on a very fundamental question of human life, which is evil. The origin of evil and the presence of evil. And none of us need to be convinced of the evil in the world, of what's all that's going on around us. So there is a fundamental point there. Whether you explain it as original sin in the traditional sense, or whether you try to find some other way of explaining it. But the current understanding does no longer hold up now that we know more, what, as I said, all knowledge is time-bound. Okay. Now, there are a lot of other doctrines. There's always, in our upbringing, the notion was that Adam and Eve sinned, that God was so angry that he closed the gates of heaven. The idea was God had created humans, and then the very first thing he did was he closed the gate of heaven and wouldn't let them in. And then that, 2,000 years later or thereabouts, he sent his son down to die a horrible death in order to atone for the sin of Adam and Eve. Think of the image of God. Horrible, to say the least. And we held to that belief. I remember somebody saying to me when COVID hit, he must be very angry with us up there. We held to that belief all that time, while at the same time, Jesus, the one who was supposed to have come to die the horrible death to atone the anger of the Father, constantly talked about the love of the Father for all of us. Total contradiction in the beliefs. I'll give you a quote from Einstein. Again, not that I'm an expert in Einstein, but given a talk, you need to give an out quote from an expert to pretend that you know something. Yeah. Einstein, the more I study science, the more I'm amazed by the complexity of the universe, and the more I believe in the existence of a creator. Interesting coming from Einstein. And then he goes on further. Humanity is part of a mysterious cosmic unity that has an inner active power, persistent through birth and death, an unfolding of a greater complex life in which God is emerging. Now that coming from one of the greatest scientists. So that's one of the things that we in our generation have to do. We have to take this male God out of the skies and instead discover a divinity at the heart of life. And as into the Acts of the Apostles that says, in him we live and we move and we have our being. Just one other aspect of it, the nativity story. Another complex one, undoubtedly mythology. The scripture scholar telling us once he had been invited by a parish priest to give a talk to his parish coming up to Christmas on the nativity. And you know the instruction the parish priest said to him? Don't tell them the truth. Do you know, that's another one of the great developments that's happening at the moment. And you had two examples of it last night in Joan and Mary. We have Angela here. There you are, Angela, theologian. For centuries and centuries, theology was the domain of the clerical academies and establishments. That has changed dramatically in the last 40, 50 years. Now, there are lots of lay people who are experts in theology, and God between us and all harm, there's even women who know theology. And you know, one of the things, I read somewhere recently a debate between two theologians of the old school, and I can't remember, it didn't matter what the topic was. What fascinated me was the language. They were using all these technical terms. You know, the way almost every institution does it. They develop their own language, and part of the idea of that is to keep it among themselves. Now, that has been blown wide in theology by the development of the lay people who, along with being experts in theology, have a much better facility at using language that communicates to the rest of us. And that's great. So what do we do about the whole nativity story? If I was ever let back into ministry, I don't think I'd have the courage to stand up at midnight mass of a Christmas Eve and say, sorry guys and girls, none of this happened. Which wouldn't of course be fully true either, because mythological stories touch on a deeper truth than history could ever touch on, and that's the whole purpose of mythology. We couldn't do without it. And it's, as we know in our own, in Ireland, we have loads of mythological stories. I'm sure you have the same here. But it's a pity that we have confused the two. So, what do we do? See, I can appreciate. My time is nearly up, is it, Mary?
You go on as long as you need.
Oh.
We can't get enough.
But lunch is at 1.
No, this is really very fundamental, I think, and very, very difficult for the church, because it almost needs to begin to rebuild the whole structure of doctrine, not to dismiss the doctrines. I think that's important, and I'm not suggesting that for a moment, but to find new language and new imagery more relevant to the modern time, and that will communicate with the modern world and with modern people to explain the fundamental beliefs of our faith. Because the fundamental beliefs of our faith are so crucial and so important. And why did Jesus come into this world? If he didn't come in order to appease the anger of God, and I'd say all of us accept now that that wasn't the purpose of Jesus. So why did he come? What was his purpose? And what do we say about his death and his resurrection? Enormous questions, and I don't have the answer to them, but I think they're right up there now, and that more and more people need to begin to reflect and to study them and see where it goes from there. I think I've nearly said all I want to say. I had a few notes down there, but that is okay. So, knowledge is time-bound. Back to Chardin, revelation that excludes future prophecy is very damaging to the church. I'll finish with a prayer if you don't mind. And since I'm in England, it's one of your own, and it's one of my favorite prayers. And so join in with me if you know it. And a great lady died a few days ago. I had the privilege of meeting her in America, Sister Teresa Kane. Yes. And we'll just remember her as we say the prayer. It's John Henry Newman's prayer. Lead, kindly light, amid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. I was not ever thus, nor prayed that thou shouldst lead me on. I loved to seek and choose my path, but now lead thou me on. I loved the garish days, and spite of fear, pride ruled my will. Remember not past years. So long thy power has led me, sure it still will lead me on, o'er moor and fen, o'er crag and tarn, till the night is gone. and with the morn those angel faces smile that I have loved long since and lost a while. Thank you.
I'm finding it hard to follow that. I hope many, many more of us on this side of the water will have you to speak some more, Tony, to give us the beautiful and simple ways that you have put things into context. We're very lucky that we can now have Tony's attention for at least the next half hour to put any questions to him. And again, it'll follow the same pattern as last night. Tony, I don't know if you want to take from the table there or whether you'll be able to stand up and answer as however you're comfortable.
I'll happily take questions as long as people don't expect me to have answers. I'll stand up if I want to say anything, of course.
I'm just making sure that I see now that the camera has got you over there, so you can. That's brilliant, even better. So, if we may, Nick, do we have the slide to remind people to raise their hands? Otherwise, I'll simply say it. All Zoomers, you have got a yellow hand down on your react button. So, if you're online, please raise your yellow hand to get into the queue for questions for Tony. And here in the room in front of me, just use your physical hand and I'll be glad to put your question to Tony. Oh, there was a race. But I will begin with Catherine on my right. Catherine, your question for Tony.
Thank you, Tony, for as always being an inspiration. As one who has also fallen foul of the church hierarchy, I am fascinated to know what has sustained you in your journey of faith in those dark moments.
May I repeat that word for word? Catherine says, as one who has fallen foul of the church authorities, may I ask you, she says, what has sustained you in your darkest hours?
That's a big question. Yeah, and it's been a great 12 years in some senses, like the stuff I've been talking about. It's also been an extremely difficult, and it has taken its toll on me. I had a stroke, for instance, some years back, and thankfully it wasn't. I have a couple of very close friends, and some of the guys in the Association of Catholic Priests have been fabulous in their support. And I suppose as time went on and as my thinking developed, at this stage, I'm not interested in going back into ministry because I think if all my age group of priests retired, it actually would be a service to the church because it would create a situation where something would have to change. So I'm more content about that. My battle now, and like this is tilting at windmills, I want to keep niggling at the Vatican, saying the process you used in dealing with me is totally without basic principles of justice. And not just me, but loads of others. All that sort of thing. Most of the time I'm good. And I can't say any more than that. Okay.
And Penelope.
Tony, I was interested in you saying that you couldn't stand up in church and say the nativity story was a mythology. But why do you think it was necessary to create mythology about that story? I can understand going back to creation, but Mary was alive, so why isn't there a more real story?
If you could repeat, may I repeat it for the benefit because they won't have heard Penelope's question. Penelope says she understands the mythology behind creation, but surely if Mary was alive, why is there a question about the mythology of the nativity story? Tony, all yours.
I'm only going by what I read on that, and Tony Cassidy is here, and he's more of a scripture scholar than me, so he could probably say more about that. My understanding of what they're writing about the New Testament now is that a good bit of it is not so much telling the exact story of Jesus as expressing the faith of the people who had come to know Jesus and experience him in their own lives. And one of the big issues, particularly for the Jews, and people like Matthew say, writing specifically for the Jews, was the question, who was Jesus? And emphasizing that Jesus had come from God and was the Son of God. Now, at the time, apparently, a lot of traditions had stories about gods coming down and impregnating women, and in that way having humans. And the taking up that story, the myth of the Nativity, was written to emphasize the importance of Jesus and Jesus' direct connection with the Father. That's the best I can do on that, but I'm not an expert on it. Okay.
Thank you. Any more questions for Tony? Online, do please raise your yellow hand and put yourself into the queue for the questions. From the room, please. Thank you. Here's the slide to show you to raise your hand. Is that a hand up? Tony, far away.
Another Tony. Tony, one of the latest mythologies, perhaps, life after death and heaven. Where do you think we stand on that? Where's our Tony going to be chatting? Those of us who are reaching that stage.
Including myself.
Could we just repeat that for the onliners? Tony wonders about the mythology of life after death. For those of us approaching it, would you care to comment?
I think, it's very hard to free ourselves from what we grew up with in religion. So there's still parts of me that worries about meeting a judgmental God when I die. But fundamentally, I tell myself, no, it's not going to be like that. My sister, Geraldine, who died a couple of years ago, she was a former nun who then ended up doing Chinese medicine and got very involved in that whole Eastern world and its way of thinking and that. And we used to discuss it a lot. But we were very much of the notion, and I remember I said it at her funeral mass, that she was convinced that whatever part of us, in you I live and move and have my being, that in each one of us there is something of the divine, and that something will not die. Now what that is, we used to call it soul in the old days. I would be convinced that in some shape or form there is an afterlife, but whether I will be there as a person meeting other people, I have no idea. But there is a wonderful mystery of the divine, and that is our destiny. That's the best I can do, Tony. Can you do any better?
We'll find out.
And that's the other thing. I mean, Geraldine and myself talked so much about that, and then she died, and that's it. And I didn't hear a word from her since. And yesterday was her anniversary.
Thank you. Hands going up. I think Olive, and then followed by Sue.
Thank you. The whole kind of warped spirituality of the threat of a terrible death and going straight to hell has been very powerful in England too, certainly in the northwest, because we had so many Irish clergy coming over with that kind of Johnsonist mentality. But literally a real grit. And I've only made the connection now because I often am a guide on weeks of guided prayer, and I've encountered this very deep inside, fairly elderly Catholics. They think they've let it go, but when they actually start to be able to talk about the spirituality, there's still that terrible fear. And I hadn't connected until you began talking that because that fear now really doesn't exist among younger Catholics. In the schools, they're not taught that here, anything like that. It's actually removing one of the powers that the clergy had, probably one of the greatest powers, because it had very deep psychological torture, really, that was being exerted on the laity to keep us quietly in the pews. And that I see now, and I hadn't before you began to talk, is a real threat to the power of clericalism. So there's talk about power yesterday, empowering ourselves. And I imagine a lot of clergy are still very frightened that if that power actually goes of threatening people's existential death, what are they left with?
For the benefit of onliners, forgive me, Olive, I'll try to paraphrase. The very real fear which exists amongst a number of elderly people, the fear of hell and death, being very hard to eradicate. People may think they've eradicated it, but as they grow close to death, they find it very difficult. If I can throw in a swift personal experience, I saw my father struggle with the end of life, and I honestly think it was his fear of hell that had been inculcated into him that made it so hard to let go.
But it gives the clergy such power, such psychological power.
And Olive reminds...
The
carpet is being pulled out from under the feet of the clergy because it gave them such strong psychological power. Where does that leave us now?
That's very good. As I said, I'm a Redemptorist, and the tradition of Redemptorists going back to the 18th century, preaching and travelling missioners and that. And the generation before me and before the Vatican Council in Ireland, there was a set text for each night of the mission. You didn't have to follow it word for word, but you had to follow the theme. The opening sentence of the opening night of the Redemptorist mission went like this. If you don't mind, I'll do it as they do it. In the old days, they'd have a beretta on their head, they'd have the crucifix here, they'd begin by blessing themselves. And they wouldn't have had a microphone, so they'd speak very loud. Now I will use the microphone for people listening. As I stand here and look down at you before me, I know not your names nor your ages. I know if you be rich or poor, strong or weak. But there's one thing I know about every one of you, one great eternal truth, that each one of you will one day die. And then heaven or hell forever.
You can remember it. So have the Redemptorists moved on from
Oh, God, yes.
Olive inquired, have the
that was
Redemptorists
before my
moved on
time.
from that? I think you must give us some more. This is scary stuff.
Tony could do the next one.
Yes.
I was just going to say that the irony of it all is that the motto of the Redemptorists is, with him is plentiful redemption.
We're being reminded by Tony Cassidy, who is a speaker this afternoon, that the motto of the Redemptorists is, repeat it for me, Tony.
With him is plentiful redemption.
With him is plentiful redemption.
Copiosa apud eam redemptio.
Thank you. We have a couple of online hands up, so I'm going to ask the room to pause for a minute. Father John, I think in Papua New Guinea, am I right? May we have your question, and we're thrilled to see you with us. Fire away, please. Unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, it should be. I hope you can hear me. Yes, it's great to be with you all from Papua New Guinea. It's in the evening here now, 7:10 p.m. Tony, great to hear from you, and thank you very much for your words. Now, as you'll notice from my appearance, like yourself, I'm a bit of an old fogey. I've written down my question, so I make sure I get it right. Why is it that old fogies like us who try to cut through all the accumulated traditions, mythologies, and so on of 2,000 years of church and return to the central truths of the faith? I'm in a missionary country here. So many of our missionaries are young, many of them Asians too, some from other Pacific islands, and all of them dreadfully conservative and traditional. Why is it the old ones who want to make this breakthrough, who want to make these incredible changes that we know we all need so much? Thanks.
Thanks very much, old fogey, like myself, and you're perfectly right. I don't know. I can only speak from the Irish tradition, and what they tell me nowadays is that the younger priests, of whom we have very few, because they've grown up in such an uncertain world, with no answers to questions and constant change, the ones who enter seminary are looking for certainty and security. Now, maybe I'm being totally unfair on young priests, but that's the sort of thing I'm hearing, and our way of looking at things is certainly not providing answers, it's providing questions and mystery and wonder and all of that, and they want clear, definite answers. I don't know beyond that. What do you think?
Thanks very much. I find it extremely frustrating that we have, excuse me, we have so many young priests here, and they are dreadfully conservative and extremely smug and self-assured and self-confident in traditional attitudes and ways of behaving. I find it very, very frustrating. I mean, I don't understand it. I read the Gospels, and what I get out of the Gospels is a call to return to the earliest days of the church, when our faith was based on the personal experience of Christ in our lives, and not based on ritual or memorized hymns or anything. I mean, they didn't even have scriptures in the very earliest days of the church. So the faith was based on the experience of Christ. Why can't it be like that today?
The one hope I'd have is, you talk about them being smug. I was smug when I was young, and boy, life has taught me not to be smug anymore. And like as we go on in life, our certainties fade away, I think, and hopefully it will happen to that generation too. But I would be worried, and I'd be worried about the future of the church. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Father John. Very powerful. Can I just ask onliners, some of you are coming across quite faint. Maybe you could just make sure your volume is strongly on. So I see that Reverend Liz Maitland is waiting, but before her, Jim Potts, coming to you online, your question for Tony.
Thank you, Mary. My question is in relation to staying in the church, or staying particularly in mass attendance. And so, Tony, I'd welcome your thoughts on how do we do that without being put off or disenchanted by old theology and limited images of God when we do attend Mass. which strongly reflects the theology and embeds the theology of the church, and which can't be easily changed by any priest, no matter how progressive or courageous he is. So any thoughts about how do we stay in that situation when we've got that reality?
God, I honestly don't know, because I see it in Ireland. Loads of people have the exact same question as you, and so much depends on their local church and what's happening there. And then other people are increasingly setting up little small intentional Eucharistic communities of various types, which is another way of going. But I don't know. Like, I'm on the outside. With a friend with whom I'm living, I celebrate Mass most Sundays and occasionally during the week, but just ourselves. So I seldom go to church myself, in the sense of going to local churches. I really don't know. It's a major problem. I'm sure a lot of you have better answers to that than me. Yeah. The same question.
Tony, thank you for turning to face the camera. It's a great temptation to talk to the screen, but it's brilliant when online can see your face as well. Jim, I don't know if that, I hope that gives you an answer. It doesn't. I think we're all very baffled. We've got several people queuing up. Several in the room. Okay, I'm over to Sue. Liz, if you could just wait. Sue from the room, please, and I'll repeat it so that the onliners hear it.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Tony, for a very courageous and inspirational guide forward. And I really wanted to talk about the way forward and take a shadow and what he said, and how we have a different prophecy, because we got very caught up in things that have pulled us down. The way forward, I think, is for people to stand up, and this is what we hope the next session will be, how we challenge, and how we find our own spirituality, and how we follow Christ. And the governance we have to leave behind, the Council of Trent we have to leave behind, and we have to move towards other denominations and faiths. I mean, you've got that in your book. So I would like to say something about how you see the way forward and how we find commonality and solidarity with other Christians as well as within the Anglican Catholic Church as well.
I'll do my best to summarise Sue's warm thanks to Tony, but at heart her question is, how do we find a way forward? How do we move forward in commonality with other Christians and other faiths to find a new way of expressing ourselves?
Yes, I'd agree fully with you that the way forward has to be in conjunction with other Christian groups, insofar as that is possible. Now, there's all sorts of political and social issues in that, but gradually in the Catholic Church, we're working our way out of this belief that we had all the eternal truths. And that was a desperate obstacle and a desperate insult to all the other believers. So we have to free ourselves from that first of all, and I think we're doing that gradually. And then I suppose something of what I was saying, not to be so hung up on all our little doctrines, and to be willing to be open to other people and to their ways of doing things and their ways of celebrating. I mean, this notion of we not being allowed to receive communion in a Protestant church or a Church of Ireland or a Church of England, that makes no sense at all. As if, God hears me coming now with more heresy. The notion of Jesus' presence in the Eucharist being totally focused on the host and the wine, it was a pity, because obviously the divine presence is in the gathering as much as in what's happening in the altar. Not that what's happening in the altar isn't important too, it is, but don't exclude it that wherever the two or the three gather together, I am there. And if we could go back to that notion, we would begin to make headway. But it is the way forward. I'd agree fully with you. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. Some claps going on in the room at that. Not to be so hung up about our little doctrines. Great phrase. Great heresy. Reverend Liz, we come to you now, and can I just put in a beg to everybody, especially from the floor? It's very hard to summarise it when your question is long, so if you can keep your questions condensed, it's the easiest for us followers. Reverend Liz, over to you. Can you
hi. So I hope you can hear me. My name is Liz Maitland, Reverend Liz Maitland. I've been ordained with the Independent Catholic Church, which I feel is a really good way forward, actually, for women who want to be ordained. You know, I've had a calling since I was 19. And meanwhile, I've been a Roman Catholic RE teacher, which is probably why Mary said that to keep it short, because I do like the sound of my own voice. But it's just great to see so many Quo there, because I've been a member of Quo for a long time. But just to get to my question, basically, I think I've got a missio Dei to help people to recognize that God is our mother as well as our father. And as you know, Jesus said in the Gnostic Gospels that the Holy Spirit is our mother in heaven. And I'm just concerned that the Roman Catholic Church is disregarding the femininity of the Holy Spirit, leaving her out. And I think that's disrespectful. And we should never be disrespectful to the Holy Spirit. So I sort of feel it's my mission to let people know God is our mother, and that if the Roman Catholic Church recognises God as our mother, then they'll recognise that women should be priests, because we are all made in God's image, male and female. And also Jesus said he is our mother hen, so he's probably non-binary, in fact, and believes that he's entirely female as well as entirely male. There's a lot of my clients, because I'm a dog trainer now, not just a teacher, and a lot of them are non-binary, which means that they believe they're both male and female. And that gave me a conviction that maybe we are made in God's image. God is really male and female. What do you feel about this? By the way, I was going to keep my question really simple, so I did my best.
Well done.
As if I wasn't already in enough of trouble. I just encourage you in the way that you're going, and I wouldn't have any difficulty at all about it. As regards God, see, I'm not even that happy using the word God anymore, because it has so many connotations for us. And equally, I'm slow to start defining the gender of God, because I think that the divine presence imbues everything, not just humans, but the whole of creation. And it doesn't, personally, it doesn't help me to start trying to decide whether God is male or female or non-binary or whatever. Now, I can see the point of emphasizing the motherhood of God as an image, but that's all it is. It's not a description. What did de Mello say? Anything we say about God is more unlike God than like God, and to keep that in mind all the time. Yeah, that's the best I can do on that.
Thank you, Tony.
Something else. Do you think it's okay to leave out the feminine like this? It has been left out. You think that's okay because man is in there, Father is in there, and Mother Julian, Saint Julian, I think she should be, said back in the 15th century that God is our mother, and she's still not even a saint yet. I mean, I was just pleased because it's hurtful. It causes a lot of panic attacks, causes a lot of people have severe mental health problems among women, not just because they've got a calling, but because they feel they've been left out, not only in the liturgy, It's really causing a lot of problems to the point of people are still attempting suicide. Like the saints, they passed away at a very young age when they had a call into sainthood. God is good and merciful. It's about time we stood up and recognized that women have a place not only in the church, but in God.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. Tony, over to you.
Well, I haven't anything to add on. Just agree with that. I just fully agree with that the divinity, that the motherhood of God and the whole notion of the femininity of the spirit has been greatly neglected. All I said is that for me, it's not a road I go down because I don't like trying to decide whether God is male or female. Okay.
Thank you, Tony. We're getting to the point whereby we're going to break up a little bit of movement for everybody in the room who's been sat for this last hour. To get it, in a minute, we'll number you off into little groups so that you can have discussion amongst ourselves. And over in the library, we will open up the Zoom, if it isn't open already, to welcome onliners. No, I don't think it's open already, but we will welcome you all onliners. Stay with us, and Rhiannon and Jeffrey are hosting that so that we can have online chat amongst ourselves as well. So just time, I think, for a very last question. Yellow hand up from Colm and Celine. Brilliant to see you back this morning, and away you go.
Thanks very much, Mary. Tony, great to see you over there. Glad you made it all the way there from Limerick. Well done you. In Ireland, the synod isn't that well regarded, mainly because of Tony. Everybody in Ireland knows how Tony has been badly treated and hasn't received justice through the process, although that's what the synod is supposed to be about. So it's not good. My question, therefore, for Tony is, what do you think would be the best possible outcome from the synod this October?
Column. I think, leaving me aside now entirely, but Column, I'm grateful for what you said. I think unless some decisions about moving forward come out of the October Synod, it will be very hard for any of us to take it seriously. So that's my worry about it. I can see what Francis is trying to do. He's trying to embed a new system of shared authority and decision-making in the church. And it would be wonderful if that succeeded. And that's why I think he's trying to keep controversial issues out of this particular October event. But if it just goes on having an exercise in synodality with no decisions, after all the years of preparation that have gone into it, people will say, what's the point of it all? That's my worry.
Colin, thank you. Absolutely superb question, and a really powerful point. My apologies, Tony, for saying that we hadn't heard of you this side of the water. But it just goes to show everybody here has. And
that's Brexit.
I'm going to draw this wonderful session onto its next part, but cannot go without just thanking you so warmly, Tony, for making it every day and inside us. No long theological words, just how we feel and hearing each other, the listening and the acknowledging. And I'm just going to keep that phrase with me, not to be so hung up about our little doctrines. Tony, may I thank you most warmly as we move into the third phase of this. So onliners, over to the Zoom, and in the room, I'm handing over to Mary, I think, to mastermind the small groups.
Welcome to all of you. We're delighted to have you here. Fantastic to have your participation. We've been listening to some very interesting people, and a lot of issues have been coming up, which I know are of great interest to all those concerned. I've got, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jeffrey, and I'm taking part from the Presbyterian perspective. My wife Rhiannon is also here, who's one of the core members, and I think that there's some things that struck me very interesting. It was tremendously interesting listening to Tony Flannery, apart from the fact of how well he had dealt with, on a personal level, his difficult experiences that he'd had, and how he seemed to be able to deal with it without such personal animosity, with some of the very interesting questions that he raised about the traditional biblical stories and how we should be looking at them today. So I find it fascinating. Now, would like this to be, as much as possible, a meeting for participants. Would anybody like to speak up, ask a question, or make a comment?
Raise the yellow hand. Yeah.
If so, please do. And I see David Jackson has got his hand up.
I've got an abiding conviction that will not go away. There is too much thinking in the church that's untethered from the contemplative spirit. Von Hugel in 1908, and I'll be very short, he said there are three elements for a healthy religion. The institutional, the theological or the thinking, but the mystical. And we're ignoring the mystical. We really must get back to the contemplative spirit. That's my conviction. And that will be a question I would have put to Tony. How far does he think that the contemplative spirit, which can be there in a myriad different forms, you don't have to sit on a mat cross-legged for an hour, of course. The contemplative spirit, the pews are full of contemplatives. But it needs an acknowledgement. The contemplative and mystical tradition of the church, so long ignored, it's being revived, but mainly outside the structures of the church. The Pope, I think, is getting us to go that way with the contemplation in the spirit method of the synod, but it's being given not a lot of room. And if you practice it, and we have tried in Root and Branch, it does not work. It's sort of gimmicky. It's a sort of falsity. It's got to be based on a contemplative mind and spirit of practice. That's my conviction. I've written a 30,000 essay on it, and I will send you it if you want it. Anyway, that would be my question. That would be my question to Tony and you all, because we're in danger of fracturing the church. If we go too quickly on any idea, we will fracture the church, and that's the great danger of Root and Branch. It needs a contemplative commitment. I am convinced, very humbly.
Thank you, David. Rhiannon here from Root and Branch.
Okay.
You should. Can you make sure that you send us that essay, because we'd love to promote it.
I will. It's very long. I'll send you a one-page summary first, but you must tell me where to send it to. Put it on the link thing.
I'll put it in the chat, or I'll contact you directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhiannon.
Okay, I'm going to go to another room, and I'm going to let Jeffrey carry on talking for the moment. Thank you.
Hey, well, thank you very much for that contribution, David. I'm sorry, Rhiannon is just moving with her computer to another room, which means that we don't have two computers fighting each other. We have quite enough conflict around without any more of that. Yeah. Okay, thanks, David. Would anybody like to carry on the point, of make a further comment on David's point or on anything else? Yeah, I see Liz. Liz has got her hand up. Would you like to? What was your contribution, Liz?
So I just wanted to carry on with this idea of being a contemplative. I've literally all my life enjoyed sitting still doing nothing. One of my favourite things. And, I'm really into being active as well. So it's not just laziness, I promise you. But I'm really into centering prayer in a big way. And I know a lot of people on Root, Branch and Root, wherever it's called, Root and Branch, because I was in Quay for about the last 20 years. And I'd really be happy to help you with setting up some sort of contemplative part. We run a Zoom group which does centering prayer every Wednesday, 8 o'clock. And it's brilliant. I mean, but for the last 30 years, probably more, done centering prayer twice a day for 20 minutes if I can, always to at least once. And it's really changed my life big time. And I think it is a fantastic part of being a Christian. It's really the only way we can really get to know God, become one with God, one with each other, really understand the truth, so that we don't see everything as a myth. I mean, I think that's shocking that people can see it as a myth. I mean, yes, there are myths. Definitely, I agree there are, but there's always some truth in myths. Way, thank God there is.
Only made, isn't it?
And it's it actually stops the feeling about myth, being a contemplative, sitting still and doing nothing, having a lot of peace in God's presence, and recognizing that the only way that we can be still in our mind is to be in God's presence. That's when we sort of understand the divine a bit more, become maybe even a bit more holy. I do hope so.
Yeah.
And that's when you stop feeling things are a myth, because a myth is that we don't believe something which has possibly got some truth in it. And we should be looking at the truth, the small amount of truth that is in everything. That's what we should be looking at.
Thank you, Liz. In fact, that's what
because either Mary might tell me off. Mary really goes back a long way. So
Tony did say that myths so often, well, we know that, don't we, from our childhood onwards, touch on deep truths. Be still and know that I am God. Absolutely, Liz. And I've got you and David already earmarked for our autumn programme, so watch out.
I'd love to come and talk, because I've written a book, 100,000 words, would you believe?
We know.
And it's called Mother God, My Missio Dei. And it's also fiction, so it's autobiography, but it's fiction. And the protagonist gets to be Pope at the end, so it gets really exciting.
Wow. That's even better.
It's far more brilliant than I ever was.
Liz, so I'll go back to David briefly. Yes, thank you, David, for responding.
Briefly. No, as a former RE teacher, Liz, I comprehend your ability to talk. It's as good as me. I too went into contemplative prayer, 20 minutes, John Mayne and Duda, what's his name? Lawrence Freeman.
John Mayne,
20 years ago, and it's changed my life. It's given me a completely different perspective. And even my wife says I'm slightly better.
And there's do guys pop into the chat. I mean, do contribute to the chat, all being saved and can be redacted and shared with you. But there are some really interesting comments coming up. One from Jacinta just now. Thank you. Who's also a Root and Branch Core team member. Thanks so much, Jacinta. I got some hands up. I've got a note that I'm going to be contacting David and Liz in due course. So be careful what you offer today.
No, I noticed that Patricia would like to say something.
Your hand's been up a wee while. Shall we miss you?
Good morning, and thank you. I'm lying in my bed, so that's why I might look a bit awkward.
Hey,
I agree
completely. You, Patricia.
Sorry,
frozen, hasn't she?
Can you hear
me? Cool.
Yeah,
we can hear you now, Patricia.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I've had spinal surgery, so I'm lying in my bed, so I might look a bit awkward. I agree completely, Liz.
We hope you're well.
And thank you. And I would love to join that group. About 8 or 9 years ago, I joined a group. I live in Windsor, and I joined a group called Way Beyond Religion. And we meet once a month, and it's something like centering prayer. And I firmly believe that that's the way forward. Small groups, like the liturgy group that we have, that Colm and Solene run, every month. I still, of course, attend my parish church. I go in solidarity with all the other people who are there, but I'm sitting there sometimes and saying, please don't be telling us this. Please don't be telling us. Please don't be preaching this stuff to us, because it's not true. But what can you do? And as clergy goes, our guy he's a very good preacher, and he's very good. He kind of takes us into a newer thinking, but of course he's constrained, and I think the whole house of cards will fall down if we do what Tony has suggested. You know, it's the mythological is important.
Frozen for us a little bit.
Anyway, I'm just saying. Sorry, I'm going on too long. I'm just saying that I think, was it Karl Rahner said that we have to be, the way forward is to be contemplative or mystics. Is that what he said? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, said enough. Thank you.
No. But we've really got a theme here, haven't we? Which is developing, and I know you're all in touch with Ruth and Bront on a regular basis, and we will be, we will continue this theme. We're planning our autumn program at the moment, and count yourselves fully involved in this. Thank you. That'd be a great theme to explore. And I realise you've been waiting patiently for a wee while. Hi, Anne, and Patricia. We really hope you get better soon. Prayers.
Hello, indeed.
Thanks, Anne. Hi, Anne.
Hi. Lots of love, Patricia. Lovely to see you again. I'm possibly going to change the shift a little bit, so bear with me if that's the case. I was just thinking of the part of Tony's presentation where he and Father John from Papua New Guinea also spoke about the new conservative, the younger priests and the smug attitude of them. And John spoke of South Asian priests coming to Papua New Guinea and bringing that style. I'm an Irish woman living in England for over 40 years now. I live in Milton Keynes very happily, and our parish, the present priest in charge is Nigerian and is bringing a spirituality and a style, a liturgical and pastoral style that is very much of his culture, and more rooted in a traditional conservative style, appeals hugely to a wide spread of ethnic groups for whom piety and bling in the church, as I think, and all sorts of devotional things are the norm. And so our parish is dominated by this spirituality. And I hear similar stories from lots of other parishes, not only locally, but across the country, London, Brighton, South Wales. People have said similar things. It's not my style. It doesn't appeal to me. I stay for other reasons, and I'm very involved in parts of parish life that are important to me. I suppose I'm torn between thinking, and this may be where the contemplative spirit might enrich us, is, where is progress and where is truth and where is the Holy Spirit leading us? Do I sit back and be resigned to this is the spirituality that's going to be dominant in our parishes? Personally, I feel the Bishops' Conference are treading a very dangerous path by just fostering all of this, because they say, thousands of people are flocking to these parishes. Isn't it great? I raised this concern recently in a chat group, and somebody else quipped, "Oh, well, Irish priests did it for ages, so now give somebody else the turn." And while I might have bristled slightly, I know there's a lot of truth in what they say. And I aspire to a very different church. And is the Holy Spirit inviting us to aspire to a very different church, or inviting me to recognize that multiculturalism is about welcoming a whole shift in our parish life, in our church profile in this country, that is a retrograde shift, but is where so many of our multicultural members are pulling us.
Very, very, very valuable and a very interesting point. I was thinking when you were talking, Anne, about younger people, because we often scratch our heads and say, where are the younger people? Actually, in my experience, I mean, yeah, the younger people are doing climate crisis activities and all sorts of things, but they're also very much involved in some of the sort of Catholic conservative evangelical groups as well, aren't they, in organizations? And who's to say they're wrong? But there is something slightly disturbing about that because of the underlying theology. Which takes us kind of full circle in terms of Tony's talk. And that was really valuable. Thank you. We've got about 11 more minutes before you have a break, and then there'll be the next session. So, John, your hand's up again. Hi, John. You're muted, I think, John?
We can't hear you, Father John.
John, if you could unmute. Don't think I can unmute you and have it go.
Just a few very brief comments. Centering prayer meditation has saved my life. I mean, it's a long story. I'm not going to go into it too much, but I was suffering from the power abuse that the church, that is the experience of far too many priests in the church, like Father Tony. So meditation and so on. But we don't teach it. I've been a teacher all my life. Started off as a primary school teacher, ended up as a secondary school teacher, and we don't teach it. Religious teaching is not about the faith. It's about the religion. It's about the prayers that we say and the things that we do. Liturgy and ceremony and so on. And we miss out greatly there. It's no wonder that so many young people drop out of the church once they leave school. Now, the other point, you might find this a little bit difficult to believe. In my parish where I live, I'm in retirement, of course. I say Mass every Sunday there. We needed a new parish priest some months ago. The parish is being looked after by a missionary society. They flew a new parish priest in from another Pacific Island country, and he was installed. The bishop came. We had a very nice Mass, and he was installed as our parish priest. He doesn't speak the lingua franca. He knows nothing of the country, never been in the country before, has no knowledge of the customs, history, culture of Papua New Guinea or its people. And nevertheless, he's our parish priest with all the powers and authority that a parish priest has. And he has, of course, adjusted the liturgy to suit his way of saying Mass and so on. And everybody has taken it with complete equanimity and no complaint whatsoever. So we have a long way to go, we have a long way to go. The only hope for the church lies in our young people. And here we are. Look at all of it. Look at all of them. Why there, for heaven's sake?
Well, I think we should change the subject rapidly, John. Age is but a number, as my son keeps saying to me. Yes, remember that, folks. Some great comments. Do treat yourself to the comments in the chat. We will save them. We will redact and hopefully share them with you all. John, I was just going to say that talking about young people, they are finding the sacred in secular spaces, aren't they?
Yes.
And I think we are as well. And that is hugely encouraging. Yes, there is another hand up. Any other hand up? Jim, and then Isabel, if that's okay. I hope I've got that in the right order. Jim, hi,
Can you hear
Jim.
me?
Yes, we
Hi,
can hear
can you
you.
hear me
Cool.
okay? Yeah, good.
And then Isabel.
Look, just
Thank you.
briefly, I totally agree with what David said before about the mystical. And yes, in Australia, where I am here, we have Centering Prayer, and we have Australian Christian Meditation Community, John Mayne and all that. So that's been something I've been involved in since 2002. The other point I wanted to highlight about Tony's talk was his third point that Chardin apparently said about the weak stones, and that is excluding future prophets. And I believe, I'm not, I'm only just one person, but that it's because the institutional church hasn't listened to its prophets through the centuries, including, what was the one that Reverend Liz was just talking about a while ago. I can't think of a name at the moment, but that, like many others, and of course Chardin, and I would put Ilia Delio, the American Franciscan, in that same category, and they're the ones we've got to listen to. That they're not just forward thinkers; they're solid thinkers. Thank you.
Absolutely. Ilia Delio, I think, is coming on Zoom, isn't she? In a couple of weeks' time. Have I got that right, folks? There are 3 organisations sponsoring her talk. So we're going to put something out in one of our Root and Branch MailChimps about that if it hasn't on your radar at the moment. So thank you so much, Jim. Really valuable. Absolutely. I think Tony was saying that, goodness me, it was chilling stuff, wasn't it? Revelation that excludes future prophecy is dangerous, quote unquote. I mean, and absolutely not listening to the prophets amongst us as well. Prophets amongst us, not just the names that we can bring to mind. Thanks so much. I've got Isabel, who's been patiently waiting, then Anne, then Liz. I think that's right. Isabel.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
To you.
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Greetings. This has been a great session, this sharing, because I think the contemplative side or the prayerful side is so important as we argue and fight with the business management of the church. I don't think there's any organization where the business management or the leadership is perfect, and certainly not in the Catholic Church. But we have to be patient as management change. I mean, systems, it needs change systems to get this synodal thing working, and I'll be long dead before it's happening. However, I'm a missionary sister. I'm a medical missionary of Mary for the last 60 years. And our God relationship, which we've been talking about in this session, is what gives us fuel for the journey as we work through all the changes that have to be taken place. And I think it's our God relationship that helps us maybe to still the anger in us. And I think that's important. I'm blessed to live in a very vibrant parish. We don't have a resident priest. He comes from another part. 2 of them come from a neighbouring parish for Mass. But the people, ourselves, the sisters, we have a lot of sisters of different congregations, we just bring our mission to the people we meet on the street, in the pub, in the cafe, in the supermarket, every day with no doubts about the God, be female, male, whatever, who has empowered us to serve one another, wash one another's feet, do all those things. And meanwhile, the bureaucracy will get on slowly with change, but we have a 24-hour mission every day. So it's been great to be here with you for this kind of praying session. And greetings to everyone I know there. God bless.
Well, that is so rich. And I have made a surreptitious note of your name as well. To continue, we're going to continue this conversation for sure. Thank you. I think that we had, great to see you, Fanny, by the way, there from Shepton. Love to Shepton. I think Anne's Anne next. Yeah, thank you, Anne. That was great, Isabel. Hi, Anne.
Hi, good morning. Hi, everybody.
Cool. Helen, lovely to see you again.
And lovely to see you too. Hello, everybody. I really liked what Isabel said. It's a 24-hour mission wherever you're planted. Is the more important thing than worrying about the business management. But really, it was a question for David Jackson. I thought I agree with what he says about Richard Rohr and contemplation, but I thought he said that is the danger of root and branch, and I didn't know what he meant. So could he maybe elucidate?
I want to pop in and clarify that point. I get that. David, are you with us, David Jackson?
Did I hear him right, really?
I think not. No, I'm not sure.
Forgive me, just popping in. He did actually say that because I heard it. And like you, Anne, I'd love to know
what's
how we can amend that if that's a problem.
That's something we should be aware of, Anne. So thank you so much for raising that. Is David with us? Maybe David can pop back in a second. When you raise your yellow hand, David, you will automatically come forefront of our screen. So hold that thought, Anne. Hold that thought. And we've got we've got Liz has spoken. We'll come back to you, Liz, though, at the end. Fanny, hi, Fanny. I hope you're okay. Fanny, you're muted, I think, my love.
Yeah. Is it unmuted now?
We can hear you loudly and clearly.
Oh, good. It's got lower hand covering the symbol for mute, unmuting.
The technology.
Several times people have spoken about young people.
Yeah.
We only have a mass at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. The only young people are either like 2 or 3 year olds, very few, or the Indians who are serving. There are no teenagers, but we certainly have, teenagers who used to come when we had mass at 10:30. But because we have to share a priest, the only mass we have is 9 o'clock on a Sunday. It seems to me that so much really depends on having more priests, and that our focus really should be on having married priests, women priests, different ways of doing mass. But we're having fewer and fewer opportunities to go to mass. And yet, if we go back to the Gospels, that's the one thing Jesus said, do this in memory of me. And it seems that this fundamental thing is being ignored by the institutional church. And that so much of what we're talking about today, and we're hearing about, with Root and Branch, it can happen perhaps in some places, but extremely difficult to see its future in the church as we are in rural areas.
Thank you so much, Fanny. In fact, today's theme essentially is empowering ourselves. So watch this space, because we'll be talking about just that, empowering ourselves in our communities, in our parishes, etc. We've only got a minute left, and I'm aware of hands up. Liz, you've got your hand up. Can you condense what you're going to say in about a minute or so? Hi, Liz, you're muted.
Yeah, well, you had to give me a little screen to click on. So anyway, I'll give it a go. So every time before I talk, people tell me I have to be, quick. But so it makes me feel a bit...
At the end, that's why.
There's a few that I wanted to say, which was, about young people. A lot of young people are fussing because women are not, included in the church. I think it would do it really good if we could aim with the liturgy to include women, even if we can't change the Bibles really quick. If people could just include women as you go along, as you read. We used to have a priest who was really good at saying, don't forget to include the women. So we just say they or one or humans or whatever. And that really helped. And when he left and there was another priest that didn't really care about that, it really did my head in. And I got all these panic attacks, waking up at night feeling, unsafe and what have you, because I'm a little bit sensitive. And
there's a lot of,
we need to do a lot of work with that. And if Root and Branch want to help, or I'm still in my Catholic church, I go with my collar and they let me have the Holy Communion. I'm now going to ask if I can celebrate the Mass with them. So please pray for me about that.
You go for it, my friend. You go for it. And you're absolutely right. Gendered language is hugely important. It is something that Root and Branch is very aware of. And if you think we're slipping up at any point, you tell us. Folks, what a rich discussion.
Just before I go, I'm writing a book called My Mother God, My Missio Dei, which is autofiction. And
I made a note.
And I just hope that this is going to help us realize that actually women can make fantastic priests, and that I believe one day we'll have a female pope.
We have the example in America, the RCWP and others.
For real.
Pope Liz. Folks, you need a break.
Not someone better than me, please. Or younger.
No, you need a 15-20 minute break. We're coming back at 11:25.
We are
on the dot for the next session, which in fact continues this theme and this conversation. This is not the end of it. I want to thank you warmly for your contributions, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Go and have a break.